I'm at Camp Nelson, and Camp Nelson's in Jessamine County, Kentucky, part of Nicholasville, right on the north edge of the Kentucky River. I've been filled with history in the short time that I've been here. It's kind of Camp Nelson History Heritage Weekend, and for as far as the eye can see, you can see a big part of what was part of Camp Nelson. There were some forts that surrounded it as well to protect it. A lot of history came through here in regard to the Civil War specifically. And right there is where the camp is set up right now, with a lot of the museum and artifacts that have been found, and just it's kind of where everything starts here as you learn about the history of the camp. And I won't recall all of what I learned, because you can find that in history books and other videos that are probably a lot more interesting than me. But I will say this, that between 1860 to 65, 66, somewhere in there, I believe that the camp was dismantled in the late 1860s. But during that time, I had no idea there was so many people here. It was the second largest city in Kentucky, next to Lexington, even bigger than Louisville at the time. Anyway, oh man, I'd love to tell some of the stories that I've heard, but I will leave that for another time. So I'm standing on Fort Putnam, and it's a kind of an earthen wall here that's been built up to provide protection for Camp Nelson. And then there's back this way, there's the first cemetery where people were civilians and soldiers were buried. And many are still there. Some have been exhumed. Back farther in the distance, back behind those trees, is the National Cemetery that a lot of people know in regard to Camp Nelson. We know several people that have served in the military that are buried there. Anyway, it really is a beautiful day in September of 2018, and just being out here to hear some of these stories has just been fascinating. So there you go. Bye.
And that was then, that was early in the year.
Well, we did.
About this, we came back and fall in here.
Yeah, we came back. Yeah.
Right there inside that, are you cold or?
What are we doing? Everybody put their uniforms on?
Plus a little bit of bar, and I had to sell guns, you know. Yeah. I didn't sell.
It's a hot day. I'm crazy to be out here walking, but there's trails that go all the way through these fields that were a part of Camp Nelson. Of course, my curiosity gets the best of me, and there's flags kind of set up all over, and there's historical markers, so I see those and I go, well, there must be something over there, and there is. There's telling about maybe like over here where they corralled horses, thousands of horses, because part of what Camp Nelson did was it was a depot north-south through here ran a road. Right now it's Highway 27. Back then it was a road, and it was a very important road. Probably one of the few roads in central Kentucky here. Probably connected with the Wilderness Road. I don't know all the history behind the road, but I do know that the bridge, one of the bridges that went across the Kentucky River, not far from here, south of here, is I think it's called the Hickman Covered Bridge or something like that. And there was another bridge that went across the river, Kentucky River in Frankfort. So if you're heading south, and part of the war effort here was having those supply lines open to go into the south, this is just a great location. Back behind me, and I'm going to go back there when it's not as hot, sometime this fall hopefully, is Hickman Creek. And so that creek kind of provides a bit of a boundary or fortification. Where I'm heading, going that way, the Kentucky River kind of snakes along through here, and it comes real close to the main road out here, Highway 27. And so this whole area is pretty easy to kind of defend as far as using it as a depot. And there was a hospital here. A big part of the history of this area, which is probably the most fascinating to me, is in regard to the African American community, the black community, and the role they played here. There was training of black soldiers. Like I said, I don't want to go into all the history. There's a lot of better videos that talk about this sort of thing that you can look up, but there's training of black soldiers when after certain particularly like the Emancipation Proclamation was issued by Lincoln. It opened the door for black men to enlist in the army. The Union needed men, and so a lot of them came through here. A lot of civilians came through here too, in regard to the black community, and they were looking for freedom and knew that there would be persecution in the South. And so, amongst other things for sure, but they came through here, and so there was a big refugee camp here at Camp Nelson. Anyway, very fascinating. I've got lots of pictures that I'll put up that you could read about those things. Just interesting people and characters that formed the history around here. Walking around to Camp Nelson here, and I'll say goodbye.
Ready to go home?
Slavery ended immediately. And just so you know, I am also the son of a slaveholder. My father's small farm in Bracken County profited from the free labor of a dozen slaves. I grew up amongst slaves. They were my friends and my playmates. Why, even I would be scolded if I was defending one of them for being punished, but I never thought of the inherent wrong and sinfulness of slavery. To me, it was just how the world was. Well, the profits of my daddy's farm paid for my college education at Augusta College there in Bracken County. I took some advanced classes at Miami University up in Oxford, Ohio, and came back to Augusta to graduate and receive my degree, and then I had to decide what to do with myself, so I decided to pursue the ministry. So I enrolled in Lane Theological Seminary in Cincinnati, and there There I was reunited with two classmates from Miami U, Samuel White and Jacob Campbell. And when I was first reunited with these young men, they took a particular interest in me. Spent a lot of time with me, talking with me, and I was feeling very flattered with all the attention until I came to realize that, well, these young men were trying to change me, or to be more precise, change my mind and my heart. Being the son of a slaveholder, they were particularly interested in winning me over to their anti-slavery cause.
Appropriate remarks. I began studying Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. What did he mean in 1776, the third line, when he said that all men are created equal? On the train ride over from Washington to Gettysburg, about 80 miles, 4 hours, I began to jot down some notes. Had the help of my secretary, John Hay. 15,000 people. Hold it up high. Thank you. 15,000 people there at Gettysburg. Might say this, no sound system. I'm told that everyone heard me. Here were the words that I gave that day, and the whole world was listening. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as the final resting place for those who gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this, but in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow these grounds. The brave men, the living and dead, have conquered it farther than we could ever imagine. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. I went on to finish that speech, which was all about a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. I got down from the platform. I went back to Washington. I believed that Robert E. Lee, Jefferson Davis, all the rebels, they would hear my words after 400,000 soldiers were dead. That we must stay together. But you see, I still hadn't found my general, Ulysses S. Grant. Mr. Grant, down here at the bottom.
Yeah, still here at Camp Nelson, and I'm standing by one of the only surviving buildings from back when this camp was being used. They call it the White House. It's completely restored inside. I haven't done the tour, but you can tour the place, and it's pretty interesting. Anyway, 150 years ago, the issues of slavery and Emancipation Proclamation, 13th Amendment, all those things that drove the movement to bring black people into full citizenship of our country came to a head. But it's remarkable that even, like I said, 150 years now later, we still struggle along some of those lines in regard to racial tension, and here in 2018 that is still a present reality, and it's a sad reality, but it's also a reminder to me that there's, the best efforts of men and women pale in comparison to what God has provided through the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's the only way that brings complete reconciliation between us and God, and between us and fellow men and women. And even at that, even with that gospel, we still struggle because we're men and women. that have fallen into sin, and we still deal with that sin and the consequences of it. The release from any of this won't be fully realized until the end, when Christ comes back and restores all things back to the way that it was started. Don't know why we travel all these roads now, and why we deal with all these tensions now, even with the right cure and remedy through Christ. But we know we serve a sovereign God who's got all this in his hands, and we're just individually responsible for our part. And I just leave that to you, my grandchildren, to keep that in mind. We're each individually responsible for our part. Take that seriously. You know, Christ said the greatest commandment is to love God with all our heart, soul, and mind. Then he said the other commandment is kind of like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. It's a given we love ourselves. It's a big time given. That just is our default language. But it's hard to love others. But that's what we have to make now our default. Is to love our neighbors as ourselves. Get the order right. Seek God. Love him with all your heart, soul, and mind, and it will make the other easier, or at least more attainable. Anyway, September 2018, out here at Camp Nelson, standing in the shade. Sorry, it's kind of hard to see Pappy's face. See a little bit of the grounds from behind me. Bye, love you.